Hallo und herzlich willkommen zur nächsten Ausgabe von Beer Lovers Drink at Home. Das Ende scheint sehr nahe, vielleicht oder hoffentlich dürfen wir bald wieder in die Gastronomie und treffen uns vielleicht einmal persönlich auch bei dem einen oder anderen Bier. Mein heutiger Gast, ich kenne ihn sehr lange, ich habe schon ein paar Stationen mit ihm durchgangen. Also er war bei einigen Brauereien, mit denen wir zusammenarbeiten, und dann eben ist der Kontakt gekommen letztes Jahr, ob wir nicht Interesse hätten, mit seinem neuen Arbeitgeber zusammenarbeiten. Es ist Vault City. Sehr spannend, sehr junge Brauerei, über die Brauerei reden wir dann gleich ausführlich, ganz kurz, falls es noch immer einige gibt und hoffentlich, die zum ersten Mal dabei sind. Ganz kurz, in euren Boxen habt ihr gefunden eine kurze Beschreibung über meinen Gast, über die Brauerei. Auf der Rückseite findet ihr die Biere kurz beschrieben und die Reihenfolge, wie wir sie verkosten gemeinsam, und dann eben den Verkostungsbogen, wo ihr euch persönliche Notizen machen könntet. Und jetzt würde ich sagen, hello Andy.
Hey, how you doing?
So first of all, thank you for doing this online tasting together with us. You know,
No, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to taste all the beers together with you. They are all really special. When you first sent me the first samples, I was really pleased, and surprised about the quality, about the fruit intents.
Great.
But we'll talk about the beers a little bit later. I would say we start and talk a little bit about the person, Andy. Give us a little bit of a background about you. We know each other for a long time, I would say, already in this industry. So
yeah, definitely.
Give us a short overview.
Sure. So I'm Andy Gibson. I'm currently the marketing manager of Vault City Brewing. I'm an Aquarius. I like long walks on the beach and sour beer, so I'm in the right business, which is good. So I started out my kind of beer journey straight out of school. I got my first job at 18 in my local pub, and my local pub turned out to be this beer mecca of Belgian beer predominantly. So they had maybe 220 Belgian bottle beers. And this, can I swear in this show? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So what I would call buttfuck nowhere in Scotland. It's really up in the middle of nowhere, a little town called Fortrose.
Okay.
A tiny hotel. So like 10 rooms, a little restaurant, a whiskey bar, and a beer bar. So the whiskey is what I first got interested in. They had maybe 350 single malt whiskies. I was there for about 2 years, and I think I drank 2/3 of them. So I managed to whiskey, which was good. But I got interested in the beers mostly because I wanted to be able to talk a bit more to customers about what they were. So I started drinking some cask beer and some Belgian beer. And eventually I tried, people were talking about this kind of best beer in the world, and it was a goose. And I tried the Boon Mariage Parfait as my first ever sour beer. And I took a sip as an 18-year-old. And I went, what the fuck is this? Like, oh my God. And I didn't like it, but I didn't not like it either. I was just really intrigued. And it sent me down this now a decade-long journey of understanding sour beer and where these flavors can come from. So I did loads of reading and I tried to understand it a bit more. And it took me about a year of really trying to get my head around these crazy, funky Belgian lambic goose styles. And they're still some of my favorite styles today. I think they're brilliant. So I then went on to work I did a little stint in Mallorca working on super yachts. I don't know if people can see me on this or just my voice, but I'm very ginger.
Okay.
I don't fare so well in the sun,
Yeah.
So I gave up that pretty quick. And also I get seasick, so working on boats is great for me. But I moved to Bristol and ended up working in the BrewDog bar in Bristol. So obviously BrewDog are really big on their beer education. I went through my Cicerone certification. So I certified Cicerone there. And through running the bar and gaining lots of knowledge about beers here, there, and everywhere, I met the founders of Wild Beer Co. down in Somerset. So Andrew and Brett quite often came into the bar. I'd host events for them, and I did loads of training and social media and stuff like that. And they put up a job post for an events and social media manager. And I was like, hey, I do social media, and I've put on events for these guys. So why don't I do events for them? That sounds great. And it was really good timing as well that they were just opening their first bar. So I did a lot of staff training for them, helped set up the bar, did the social media, and did events. So that's where we met, was at Wild Beer, and going out and events and drinking some sour beers, which is always nice. So I was at Wild Beer mostly doing events across Europe and the UK. And that's where I ran into a guy called Rich Kilcullen, who is ex-Wicked Weed from the States. So he's a bit of a sour genius. And he offered me a job up at BrewDog Overworks, so to open the BrewDog Overworks program. So I made my way back home. For those not so great with UK geography, Bristol and Somerset is in the southwest, so the complete opposite from the northeast where I'm from. And Aberdeen up by BrewDog was maybe 9/10 of the way home for me, So it was nice to be back in my homeland and near family and stuff like that. So that was amazing. I saw Overworks go from an empty room into a world-class sour beer facility. It was amazing. My first week was crawling into the back of trucks to cut the ties on the fermenters and get the fermenters out on the forklift and then haul on a chain hoist to stand up all these fermenters. It was really an amazing experience to see it from nothing to something really special.
And really big.
Sorry?
And really big. Special and big. Yeah.
Really big and very different to wild beer. This is what I find so intriguing about sour beer, as I'll talk about more. But the Wild Beer Co. is on a farm. Quite literally, it's on a dairy farm. And you have trees aging in shelves on one barn, and the next barn over, you have barrels of beer aging and gathering like dust, and it's really rustic and farmhousey, which is really cool. And the way they blend is very artistic. It's kind of a bit of this and a bit of that, and put this together and see how it comes out. Then Overworks Rich's program was a lot more methodical, more kind of engineering based, where it's all done in batches and everything has its place and its time and it rotates and it's very methodical, which was, again, really interesting. I learned, I think, more from Rich at Overworks in about a month than I did working for 2.5 years at Wild Beer. Not to say that I didn't learn a lot and that the Wild Beer don't know what they're doing. It's just a very different way of operating, So it was really eye-opening for me, that. Then I left BrewDog Overworks at the tail end of 2019. And just at the start of 2020, I joined the Vault City team. So I joined as their first employee. So I'm the first person to be an official employee of Vault City. I think Steve and Johnny, the co-founders, will get into the whole Vault City backstory. But I don't think they were technically employees at that point. They still had full-time jobs. So I was the first employee at Vault City as marketing manager. And then 2 weeks later, the pandemic hit and lockdown happened. And it was a pretty crazy ride from then until now. But that's not my story. That's the Vault City story. So that's a bit about me. And
that's perfect. That's perfect. It was a really, really cool entrance, and an overview. Yeah, and last time we met in person was at Overworks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that must have been 2 years ago. Oh,
yeah, God. 2 years, probably. Yeah, 2 years, I would say.
Holy crap. Time flies.
Time flies, really.
Time flies in a pandemic.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Time goes really, really fast. So I would say, let's open the first beer.
Absolutely. Let's do that. So we're getting stuck into the Pear Drop Session Sour first.
Yes.
All right, let me pop this guy. That's the one.
That's our first beer for tonight.
That one came off. Oh, beautiful. Look at that.
Perfect. So cheers, first of all. Cheers, and thank you again for doing this together with us here in Austria.
Thank you. Nice to see you again. That's tasting really good. So, Pear Drop Session Sour. I'll dive into this beer and then we'll kind of backtrack to the Vault City story if you like. Sorry?
Yes, it's a perfect idea. Pear Drop Session.
Pear Drop Session. So the Session Sour series, I apologize. I'm going to say a lot of S's this evening, and I have a Scottish accent and a lisp. So
if it's going too fast and too difficult, I will let you know. But so far, everything goes down perfectly.
Good.
It's really good to understand.
So the Session Sour series is something that we came up with near the beginning of lockdown last year. We wanted to kind of diversify what Vault City was doing a little bit and put it into the smaller bottles, which you'll probably notice they're in 330ml bottles rather than 375. And the idea behind all of this kind of shift was a different way of enjoying sour beer. So up until that point, all of the beers had been sort of 7%, heavily fruited, with some crazy other adjuncts and the acidity, of course. So they were pretty full-on beers. And we wanted something a little bit lighter, a little bit more refreshing, a little bit easier going for ABV and also on the palate as well. So we wanted to just have a little bit more flexibility in what we were producing. So the Session Sour series came out of that. It was more of a refreshment idea. And the way that I always describe them is it's more like grabbing a 6-pack and going for a picnic than it is grabbing one bottle and having a sixth of the bottle at a bottle share, which we've got those beers and we'll get to it, but
makes sense.
It's different. So that's one of the questions we get quite a lot is why the smaller bottles. And it's because it's a different kind of beer. It should be approached differently and enjoyed differently, we think anyway. So the Pear Drop Session Sour is one of my favorites of the sessions, actually. It's got that real zippy acidity. We talk about our house mix culture as having a sherbet, like a lemon sherbet note to it. And I think this beer definitely has that sherbety fizz and that quite lactic acidity, that really piquant acidity. And with the pears, it comes together really beautifully. The reason we wanted to do a Pear Drop Session Sour is we actually did a bigger beer called Pear and Vanilla Sour last year. And it was one of our kind of standout beers of the year. And it was a lot more delicate. We're known for really big, bold, crazy flavors like the beers that we're going to get into later on. And so actually having something that was a lot more subdued and more subtle was something that we didn't think would go down that well, but we wanted to have, again, a bit of diversity and a little bit of change in the range. And it was so good that we knew we had to do pears again. And we thought that actually doing just pear in the Session Sour was the perfect way. Have that perry kind of delicate summer vibe in that pear flavor with that nice Session Sour acidity where it's not crazy rip your face off sour, but has that nice mouth-watering tartness. And it all comes together beautifully. There's no frills, no crazy bells and whistles. It is a pear sour beer straight down the line.
It's true, from the first smell to the first sip, it's really, as you explained, it goes really, it's not too sour. It's really super balanced. It's super nice to drink. And
yeah, that's it. It's exactly what it says on the tin. Exactly what we're after is that refreshment. And it's just pear from start to finish, which sounds silly to say, but it's actually a very difficult fruit to ferment with, because pears are mostly water, right? And water and sugar, and all the flavors kind of in the skin. If you imagine actually eating a pear, the flesh is just watery and juicy, succulent, but all the flavor comes from the skin. And on the finish, particularly for me with this beer, you do get a little bit of that skin note to it. It's I think partly a dryness of the mix culture, but the overwhelming flavor of the pear comes out in that slight skin character, which I really like. It's got that really fresh, almost like cutting a fresh pear kind of finish to it. Yeah, this is
a superb beer. But then tell me, what makes a sour beer so special for you? Because you told us, in the starting, when you started, you get the first sip of Boon Mariage Parfait, and then you really fall in love with this beer style. But what is this kind of special thing when it comes to sour beers?
Yeah, for me personally, it comes down to my kind of pseudoscience or love of pseudoscience, as it were. I'm a massive nerd. I've gone on to
good.
Thank you. I've gone on to pass my advanced Cicerone. I'm a BJCP judge. I love learning about beer, and one of the things that really interests me is microbiology and how, particularly with mixed cultures, I find them really interesting. So our house mix culture that we have at Vault City is very different to the mixed culture that we had at Overworks, which is very different to the mixed culture we had at Wild Beer, and which really puts different sour beer programs and breweries in different camps for me. That the mixture of their microbes really makes up the soul of their beers, and that's something I think you'll taste all this evening with all of our beers. They have that underlying characteristic Vault City note, which is our mixed culture. And that interplay of yeast and bacteria I find fascinating, but also the acid flavors and the acid profile. So with being a nerd, I like understanding how flavors come together and how your palate reacts to different things. And it's something that I always find fascinating, and I say in tastings quite a lot, is that sorry about that, I'll turn my emails off. that with the kind of human palate and acidity, a lot of people think of sour beer and it sounds bad, right? And it's quite off-putting. It's a real challenge in selling sour beers that people think sour beer is a bad thing. Particularly in the UK, it definitely comes from a cask beer tradition, where if a beer tastes sour, it's because the cask has gone sour. And that is a bad thing. That's not good. You don't want that. And we even have trouble, we put our beer away to a lab when I was at Overworks, and this external lab analyzed it and said, oh, you've got spoilage organisms in here. It's like, yeah, we know. They're all the organisms we want to be in there.
We want to be in beer.
Yeah. So it's a quite a difficult thing on that front also, but it makes it so fascinating to me that the human palate likes acidity. I've now got a 2-year-old son, and last year I gave him a slice of lemon, and you give a kid a slice of lemon, they bite it, they make the face, and it's hilarious, but they always go back for a second bite. They'll always go back for more. And it's the same thing, or the opposite thing with bitter flavors. So you give a kid an olive or a blue cheese or, I don't know, anything that's particularly bitter, and they don't like it. It's why we like coffee when we're an adult, but not so much when we're a teenager. You have to condition your palate to like bitterness. That's where hops can be quite challenging for a lot of people, whereas these beers don't have any hops in them. So Vault City don't use any hops in the kettle. We occasionally use them in the fermenter, but none of these beers have. And so you don't have that bitterness to fight against. Whereas acidity is something you get used to very quickly and actually are conditioned genetically to enjoy, because it generally means it's something good for the most part. And yeah, that for me is a really interesting kind of dynamic, especially in craft beer, where everything's so focused on hops, and this big idea of the hops and roasted stouts are the kind of the sought after flavors. But I don't know if, I'm sure you remember, I'm not sure about everybody listening, that there was the whole 1,000 IBU race, right? And they were racing for the most bitter beer, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a great bit of marketing in there somewhere called the lupulin threshold shift. I don't know if you ever came across that term.
No.
It was very American centric.
Okay.
The idea being that when you drink hoppy beers and bitterness, the lupulin is what gives it the bitterness from the hop. And you'd have to condition your palate to tolerate more and more of it. But then because your palate does tolerate it and does condition to it, you actually get chasing more and more. So you want more and more bitterness to have that same effect. It's kind of like chasing the dragon, right? The green dragon. So there's this idea of chasing that. And it's a little bit the same with sour, that people generally want more and more sour. That's not necessarily the best thing for it, but people are much more receptive to sour flavors. So for me, it's really interesting, particularly at events and beer festivals and stuff like that, when somebody comes up to the bar and says, oh, I'm here with my friend, he likes craft beer, I'm just drinking cider from the cider tent. It's like, great, try this. It's basically not beer. Give it a try. Like, pretend it's a cider and have a sip. And they go, wow, it's sour. And that was a bit weird, but because it's acidic and it's fruity. And all of a sudden you've got someone who doesn't drink beer drinking beer. There's my big analogy for it is most people, like I'm sure a lot of people listening, go on their craft beer journey, right? And you probably started out drinking lagers, and then you maybe got introduced to IPA. For me, it was getting introduced to real ale, but the idea is the same. You're like, wow, beer can have so much flavor and so much depth, and there's so much other stuff. And then you go on to your stout phase. And if you're like me, you get 6 months into barley wine territory and you lose your memory for a little bit. And then you end up drinking sour beer at the end of the road. And it's always seen as this end of the road, like tip of the mountain journey of beer flavor. And it's this like held up here as this elite and very nerdy and exclusive thing. But you've also got a bit of a spectrum going on, right? So you have all of your beer drinkers and your craft beer nerds and super nerdy stuff at this end. But you've also got people that don't like beer because they don't like all the bitterness in between. And so you have wine drinkers and cider drinkers who never go near craft beer, but all of a sudden they're drinking the really cool shit, you know? And that to me is a really interesting place to mix, where I can get super nerdy with someone. We can talk about mixed cultures and wild fermentation all day long. But then someone can also just drink it and enjoy a pear flavored drink. And just be like, this is tasty and refreshing and I like it. So that's a really interesting spot for me. And that's why I love sour beer, is this kind of weird mixed culture microbial side, but also that flavor and palate side.
Especially, I think, that for wine drinkers, it's a really, really cool entrance into the beer world, in kind of the beer world,
Yeah,
people
definitely.
try, and then I completely agree that most of the wine drinkers, especially the white wine drinkers, if they want something really sour, acidity, then it's a perfect entrance. So the first question is coming from Walter. What kind of peers are you using? You know this?
Which, sorry?
Peers, which kind of peers are inside, in the beer?
Pears? Oh, yes. So the pears were Williams pears, I believe.
Williams, okay.
Williams. It may have been a combination of Williams and Conference. Conference are usually the ones you buy at the supermarket. They're the ones that are readily available as eating pears. Williams pears are sweeter, and I believe they're not so often sold
in the supermarket.
Yeah, I think they're probably a bit more specialist. But they're not Perry pears. They're not like traditional cider pears. They're more juicy.
Are you adding also some esters into the beer?
So we don't actually get that many esters produced. We do get quite a lot of esters produced by our mixed culture, but we don't get any pear drop esters in our mixed culture. So I was a little bit worried about calling it pear drop sour, because it sounds like it's just full of isoamyl acetate and that we've messed up our fermentation and it's gone bad. But our mixed culture base beer, the sour base beer, is very very tropical and very stone fruit. So for me, it always comes across as apricot from the house mixed culture when we just have the base beer. But it's a lovely fruity background note, which actually helps all the fruit flavor come forward. So all of our fruit additions are usually helped along by the mixed culture's esters, for sure.
Cool. And how many beers you're adding per liter?
This will be, I think, in the realm of 200 grams per liter.
Okay.
So I think we did 30 hect batch or 40 hect batch. That would be half and half. About 600 kilos per batch.
So a lot of fruit.
A lot of pears. Yeah, there's a lot of vitamins going in you tonight.
Yeah. Sure, I can imagine. So food-wise, if you can give a recommendation, what kind of food you would recommend to this beer?
For me, I love beer and food pairing. And my favorite thing with beer and food pairing is intensity matching. So making sure that the beer and the food don't outshine each other. So if you have, really intense beer and a really intense dish, I love that, and they come together really nicely. When you have that skewed either way, it can all get very lost. So for me, super delicate. I've actually not had the chance to pair these beers with anything outside of my own kitchen.
Yeah.
But hopefully soon I'll be able to do a bit more of that. But for me, I would definitely go with some kind of seafood dish. I love seafood anyway, and being right by the North Sea, we get great shellfish. So I'd probably go with langoustines, maybe garlic and chili langoustines. The chili might take it a little bit too far. But I can actually see scallops working really well too. Maybe like buttered scallops. With the richness of the seafood and the oiliness of the seafood, the acidity and carbonation will clear all that away. And I think you'd actually get a lot of that fruitiness out of scallops and langoustines that you can get from shellfish. That'd be my top one.
I can see this. Yeah. You have to make a note also for me. It's cool. Yeah,
I'm going to go to my fishmonger tomorrow and get some langoustines.
Okay. Some fish.
So should we do some Vault City story?
Yeah, we can talk a little bit, because it's a really young brewery which you joined. They started back in 2018.
Yes, 2018. So in 2018, it was two guys called Steve and Johnny, and they were both homebrewers and kind of came together through their different homebrewing to just chat about homebrew and all the rest of it, and started brewing together. And through their friendship, they decided that actually they could potentially start a brewery and wanted to kind of give it a go and step it up a little bit. So the origins of Vault City back in 2018 are brewing on Steve's kitchen stove. So the brewery started out in an Edinburgh kitchen and a 400-litre pot. So literally just a big pot on the stove, and brewing 400-litre batches. I think it was smaller to start with, but that's when they started actually selling the beer. And then fermenting in 600-litre vats in the basement. So exactly what you've got now is the essence of what they put together, but it's a very different style of beer. We eventually got on to coining Vault City beers as modern sour beers. That was the kind of phrase that I came up with in the middle of last year to really stand Vault City apart. And we'll get to that, but that they're definitely not traditional sour beers, right? The Boon Mariage Parfait is about as far removed from these beers as you could imagine, but they're still mixed fermentation sour beers. So how do we communicate that? And the term that we settled on was modern sour beer. But the origin of that is actually that Johnny was really into his mixed culture and into his farmhouse styles and Kvike strains and acidity from bacteria. So he was doing all of the traditional mixed firm homebrewing, and Steve was mainly focused on brewing New England IPA. So that was his big thing, was these cloudy, very fruity, big-bodied, residual-bodied beers. And when you actually take those two together and just smush them, you end up with fruity, opaque, full, and tart. And that to me is like, I never would have put New England IPA and mixed fermentation sour beer together.
Yeah.
And it works beautifully. And that's exactly what we're kind of coming from with these beers, is that balance of sweet and sour. It's always that way around. So there's a level of acidity for sure, but it's never crazy sour. And it's a level of sweetness, but it's never crazy sweet. It's always kept in check because they balance really nicely. So that's where it started off, homebrewing in Steve's kitchen. And with that, on the 400 litre pot, they were putting it out to local bars in Edinburgh and across Scotland and a little bit into the UK. And they started being able to get out to festivals. So they're brewing enough beer to get out to festivals. They did the UK circuit and also got invited to some really cool international festivals like Bruskeval in Sweden, Art Beer Fest in Portugal, a few others that I can't quite remember. But they went to some really cool festivals with these crazy beers that no one had ever seen before. And actually, that's where I had my first try of Vault City beers, was at the Bristol Craft Beer Festival.
Okay.
And I was still at Overworks. And of course, I'd come from Wild Beer, where it's farmhouse and traditional. And then I'd been at Overworks, where it was barrel aged and Britannomyces and quite dry, a bit more methodical. And then I tried these beers from Johnny and Steve. And I was really, like, hearing about it, I was really disdainful. I was like, this is stupid. Like, this doesn't work. This is ridiculous. Where's my tradition? Where's my rich history of mixed fermentation sour beer? This is sacrilege. And then I got to a festival and I tried one of these beers. Like, this is fucking wonderful. You know, it's lovely. It's balanced. It's not crazy sweet. It's not crazy sour. All the fruit flavors there in spades. The flavor combinations are really interesting. I was totally sold. I was like, this is actually great. This is the future. Which led me to the whole concept of modern sour beer. So yeah, they did a big festival circuit in 2019. And at the very end of the year, they were kind of dithering as to whether to try and step it up and how they would do that, where they could have a premises that they could make it any bigger, how they were going to be able to fund kit. There's no bank loans involved with Vault City. There was no kind of family members putting in lots of money as an angel investor. It's just been what they've been able to cobble together, and then what they've been able to get back from the sales of the beer that have helped to grow. And the big leap of faith moment was actually a friend of Steve's family offered them a spot at his brewery. So a guy called Duncan runs a brewery called 71 Brewing in Dundee. So it's about 2 hours north of Edinburgh for the geography interested. 2 hours north of Edinburgh in Dundee.
Dundee United, I know, the football team.
So they'd just taken on a new warehouse, and the new warehouse was way too big for them at the time. So he was like, well, why don't you take a corner of my warehouse? You can just pay rent on the warehouse. You can buy your own tanks to put in there, and you can use our brew kit. So that was what they did. They decided to go for it and jump in. So bought 2 fermenters and laid the floor and the drains and all that kind of stuff. Had a little bottling line that we borrowed from 71. And then it's an interesting kind of time because it's not really contract brewing. It's not really gypsy brewing, and it's not really cuckoo brewing, which is all we have for it in the UK. It was somewhere in between, where we had our fermentation and our bottling and our warehousing, and we would buy all the ingredients and we would actually be there to brew, but then we would use the brew kit of 71 on brew days. And they obviously wanted our sour beer as far away from their production as possible. So we had to roll out like 75 meters of 1-inch hosing every time we caught a brew. So it made for very slow transfers and a lot of lugging.
I can imagine.
Fun. But yeah, we went from, or sorry, I should say they went from 400 liter batches on the kitchen stove to 4,000 liter batches in 71 without having to buy a building, without having to buy a brew kit, basically just buying.
We were super lucky.
Very, very lucky. It was a huge stepping stone for us, for sure. And then, yeah, that was the very end of 2019. They had a couple of releases there. And then I came on board when there was just 2 fermenters. And I think the week after I arrived, another 2 fermenters arrived. So we doubled our fermentation capacity up from 8,000 to 16,000 liters. And then the pandemic hit, which was the big game changer. You know, that was the fire that just kept on burning. So we're still here, I think. Just a little lag.
Yeah, but my connection was really, really bad now for a second.
It's okay, don't worry. I'll forgive you.
So I missed the last seconds.
Oh, so yeah, we got up to doubling our fermentation, and then just as we had 4 4,000 liter tanks, and we had filled them all with fresh batches, it was just then that the pandemic hit, and we had to go, holy crap, we've got 4 beers in tank. And Steve had just quit his job to go full time at Vault City. They'd just hired me, and Johnny was full time at that point as well. So we'd just had this massive kind of leap of faith, as we call it, into the business to really put everything into it and see where we could take it. And then the pandemic hit, which was pretty exciting.
So before we continue this story, I would say let's open the second beer.
You're reading my mind. I think that's a good idea. With the lack of pubs being opening, this is the most I've spoken to anyone in weeks, so I might get a little hoarse.
No, it's perfect, you know. So it's really interesting, you know. There are so many stories, and I already got some new questions coming in. But we also have to look a little bit on the time, so we have to go to the second beer.
The mango.
That's the second beer for tonight.
Oh man, that color.
Yeah, it's it's weird. The color is like a fruit juice, you know, so it's really like a mango juice, you know.
Yeah, for sure. So this one is right up at about 300 grams per liter. So this will be 800 kilos in the batch. Yeah.
It's a sour mango. It's a mango sour. So it's difficult, you know, how you want to call it. It's a mango sour. It's a sour mango. It's superb.
Yeah, it's really lovely. For me, it's almost like all the stages of a mango. There's the aroma is like the skin almost. Mm-hmm. So like when you just cut into a fresh mango and you can still smell that almost green mango character. And then when you taste it, you have this big explosion of acidity and sweetness as well. And that lingers off into this kind of mouth-watering richness. And the aftertaste of fresh mango, it's just like slicing into one and taking a slurp.
Easily can have this beer for breakfast. Oh, really? It's a really hot, dry summer day in the morning, you know. Mm-hmm. Or if you get something like a brunch, then it's a perfect combination, you know, to bring this beer on the table.
A mimosa beer.
Yeah. So going back to the last beer, Birgit is asking, when you're adding the beers, is it kind of at which step at the brew the beers are added?
So with all of our beers, we do so it's all mixed culture fermentation, which a lot of breweries do differently, but we have our mixed culture ready to go. We have a primary fermentation with our mixed culture. We let that get all the way through its fermentation so it's finished with the malt sugars, and then we add the fruit when the yeast is still in suspension and active. Mm-hmm. So we don't add any more yeast, but we don't add the fruit halfway through. We add it at the end of fermentation. So it goes through a re-fermentation on the fruit. And that's where we found the best kind of character from our yeast and bacteria, but also the best flavor from the fruit stays in the beer as well. When you put the fruit in a bit too early, you tend to find that more of it dissipates out. With the vigorous fermentation from the malt sugars, you end up blowing off a lot of the aroma. So actually this kind of slight dip in fermentation, then adding the fruit, and then you have a bit of a lag and the fermentation kicks off again, is when we get all of that rich mango, any pear, mango, every other fruit character manages to really stay in the beer.
No, it's perfect. Then Walter is asking, is there any beer from you guys without adding any fruits? Is it something is there something like a sour ale without any fruits?
So we have not done any kind of base beers. The base beer our brewing is actually fairly simple. So we have 3 base beers for the 3 kind of categories or ABV strengths, if you like, that we brew, which we'll get onto in a bit. But our base beer is local malt. The farm that grows and mills the malt is like 16 miles that way, which is, I guess, like 25k. So it's maybe like a half-hour drive to the maltster. And then it's the farmers who, harvest the grain and malt it and mill it that drop our grain off, which is really cool. So we have base pale malt, and then we have wheat from them, and we have a little bit of oats from somewhere else, from further away. So it's very simple base recipe. And then all the magic comes from the mixed fermentation and then from the fruit additions and spruces that we do that way. So, excuse me. I've forgotten what the question was. Apologies. I was talking about malt and I got distracted.
No. The question was, if you also bring out some, let's say, only sour beers without any additional fruits, is this something?
So the base beer is lovely, and we've had quite a lot of requests to release the base beer just as the base beer, which is quite interesting to me. But we've not had any releases without something added in. So we do have non-fruited sour beers, but they're sour IPAs. So sour IPAs is something that I think has been done really badly. I can only think of maybe 1 or 2 sour IPAs that I've enjoyed in the past kind of 5 or 6 years since I've seen them come on the scene. And so this is something that we really want to explore and push, and how can we make it enjoyable and how can we make it good? Because there's not that many sour IPAs out there, and that's one, because they're difficult to make, and bitterness and sourness don't go very well together. So that's a real flavor clash. So making sure that there's no bitterness, and definitely going down that New England IPA route with the hop character is where we're going with it. But we've done a few SIPAs, as we call them. So we've done...
I think we got one. We had one sour IPA.
Oh, in your...
No, from you guys. We get delivered one sour. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think...
Very possibly.
OJ IPA.
The OJ IPA, yeah.
Yeah, the OJ IPA. So I have to go and taste it tomorrow then, yeah.
That one does admittedly have fruit in it.
But it's this kind of mix, between IPA and sourness, what we are talking at the moment, That's why...
Yeah, OJ IPA is great. We're just about to rebrew it as well. So we're about to do a new batch of the OJ IPA. But the sour IPAs were great. And very interesting, because I think they're beautiful and people seem to really rate them, which is great. But sour beers is something people usually shy away from, whether they used to be not so good and people have tried bad ones and don't want to try it, or if that classic, IPA and sour shouldn't be together in that kind of old school thinking of a sour beer is a bad beer. I'm not sure. But that's a hill we're willing to die on. So we're putting our flag in sour IPA.
That's good to hear. So there will be then time to come more and more, to get more and more sour IPAs then.
I hope so.
Okay, cool. So let's go back to the story.
Sure. So I think we got to the pandemic hitting, which is
March 2020. Where we are.
Thank God. That was a month. So the big news kind of came about. I came on as the marketing manager, as the first employee. And one of my first tasks was to build a website and have a little web shop and stuff like that. And just so that people could understand what we're about. I actually had real difficulty moving house because I was trying to move house and prove that I was employed. And they do a check on you to see who your employer is. And they didn't have a website and they didn't have a phone number. So this is just bogus. You're not employed by anyone, So that was a bit frustrating. One of my first jobs was to build a website, which was taking a little bit of time, and we were kind of working out how we wanted to do it and stuff like that. There was no rush for it. Then the pandemic hit, and all of a sudden there was a rush for the website. So we put together a website really quickly. We turned on our online sales, and we saw this amazing support from our sour beer fans and sour beer community that really wanted to still have their beers at home. They're used to enjoying our beers, and they wanted to be able to get a little bit at home. So we had these 4 tanks full of beer. We had 3 new releases, one that we were keeping off to the side for a minute. But we had these 3 beers, and we just kept them in tank. So the best place for a beer is in the fermenter. Once it goes into package, there's lots of other, variables, temperature, conditions, all that kind of stuff. So we just left them in the tank and packaged as we needed it for the orders, and just did it that way. So the bottling line at that time, we'd actually ordered a new bottling line, but we had the gravity fillers. We call them the cows. It's a bit like milking cows. And with the shutter boxes. So it was like, open the shutter, put the bottle in, close the shutter, open the lever, close the lever.
It's how we fill our bottles at Muttermilch in the basement.
Cool. So we bottled, what would it be? 12,000 liters of beer by hand like that. So the big stint, we had a big order day, and me and Steve did a 24-hour shift between us, just one person at a time. So I think Steve did like 11 hours and I did 13. It was from 2 in the afternoon until 5 in the morning to get enough beer. Just one beer, and that was enough for 1 week. So it was pretty crazy. And we desperately needed our new bottling line, which there was issues. There was a van crashed and broke the bottling line, and then the wrong filling head was on it, and then this and then that, and it went whatever. Yeah, it was a real struggle. But now we had our bottling line arrive, and to illustrate how much it meant to us, what we managed to package between 2 of us in 24 hours, we could then do in 1 hour. So it was a long time coming, but it was really good. So
and it was really needed in this time, huh?
Oh, for sure. It saved our bacon. But the interesting thing with the pandemic was we had all these kegs. Obviously, Johnny and Steve had a great year of festivals. So they banked up a load of kegs to take 2 festivals in 2020. And we had nothing to do with them, but we had this little gravity filler, right? So we hooked up the kegs to the gravity filler and actually bottled out of keg back into bottle. So we could kind of re-release beers. And we re-released these beers on a Sunday and grabbed the term Sour Sunday. So the hashtag Sour Sunday, if you Instagram it, is mostly just Vault City beers.
Okay.
So the hashtag Sour Sunday launches became a huge thing for a lot of people. And they were beers that people knew and loved, and they'd come back and grab them. But because there was only our most rare was 1 keg, 1 20-liter keg, which gave us like 50 bottles or something like that. Or up to maybe 6 kegs for some of the ones that we had a bit more of. They would go so quick. So all of a sudden we had people every Sunday, at their laptops hitting F5, being like, I want it, and then not able to get it. And it was really pretty crazy how many people got so involved in these beers. And the very end of that little part of our story was that we launched our 4th beer. So we had the 4 beers in tank, and the 4th one was actually a stout, an imperial stout. We'd done a double mash imperial stout, and we split it into 2 tanks and did one with coconut cream and the other with almond and vanilla. And we launched them alongside a novelty glass. My partner is actually a glass blower and a glass maker. Okay. So she manipulated these glasses that had like wobbly stems and tiny little glasses. And it went bananas. I think we had 700 orders in one day, something like that. It just went absolutely crazy. And it was so busy that the website broke, or more accurately, I broke.
Okay.
I fell apart, not the website. But it was just pandemonium. At this point, we'll get round to it because it's an important part. But at this point, Johnny had left the business, one of the founders. So it was just me and Steve. We were bottling all the time. We were getting all these beers out, doing all this website, doing as much as we could to promote the new beers. And then we had this huge explosion of orders for these crazy stouts. And it was just too much. We had to pull the plug, just walk away from it for a couple of weeks, come back with a new website on a new server, a new service, and just start again, basically.
Which makes sense, because otherwise, it's... And then, of course, you have to also look for new people, huh? You must hire people, warehouse people.
Yeah, so we were very fortunate again with the pandemic. We've managed to struck a lot of lucky moments with COVID-19. That it was just me and Steve from about March until September, something like that. And we were going hell for like 6 months. Yeah, it was 6 months of just me and Steve running. You know, when you're a kid and you're running downhill, you like throw your legs out and you're not sure when you're going to eat shit, but you know you're going to eat shit at some point and eventually you're going to come crashing down. We were just throwing our feet out in front of ourselves and we managed to stay up. You know, it was crazy. I don't know how we did it, but we managed to keep going. And the big help for us was with the pandemic and all the bars being shut. There was one local bar in particular that's actually owned by another brewery called 6 Degrees North in Scotland. Okay. A bar in Dundee that's owned by them. And their team were, you know, on furlough. So they weren't working and they were looking for stuff to do and some extra pocket money. So we ended up basically recruiting the entire Dynamo team as part-time packers.
Okay.
Between I think 5 members of staff of the pub, we had someone in like every other day or 2 of them in every other day to help with the packaging. So we had our temporary packing crew who were actually just our friends from the bar down the road who was helping them out. They were helping us out. And yeah, it worked out really, really nicely through the summer.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's a brilliant story. Mango beer, food pairing?
Oh, mangoes. I like mangoes. I actually really like curries with mango. So the spice and the aromatic spice, not necessarily the heat. I'm very Scottish as well as very ginger, so I don't do well with spices. But the aromatic components really work well with mangoes. I think they give a nice fullness and richness, which can help kind of mellow out some of those angry spices and peppers. So maybe going down more of a Moroccan kind of tagine.
Tagine, yeah. That's a good idea.
I think that'd be good. Sumac is one of my favorite spices, and sumac's kind of lime and paprika note, I think would go really well with the mango sour. Plus a sumac heavy tagine, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Manfred is asking if you ever tried a sour beer from Austria.
Have I tried a sour beer from Austria?
It can be, which back when we were together at the Who Cares Festival, it can be the festival beer, it was this totem, this sour IPA.
Oh.
Which was, I'm not sure if it was in this year, but I guess it was this festival beer, this sour IPA, which was new for the Austrian consumers,
For sure. I was going to say, I'm not sure.
17, something like this, 17, 16 can be. But I'm not sure. That's what I got in mind,
Yeah, probably is the short answer. But that festival was a little hazy for me.
Yeah.
I think there's a big sleep in the back of Benny's car.
Not only for you. Cool. So then go to the big bottles.
Yes, let's
to the bigger bottles, to the bigger beers.
I'm getting rid of a little bit of that. So yes, we've tried 2 of the session sours. So the Raspberry Violet is one of my favorite beers. This is one of my recipes, so I'm very proud of it. So I hope you all like it. But it was so popular that we actually don't have any left in the brewery. Some of our last cases went to Amerson. So
okay, that's good to hear.
We don't have one to drink.
We can be really happy.
But I'll tell you all about it.
Okay, perfect.
I'll just have some water for now.
Okay.
So moving up to the bigger bottles, we move into our next series of modern sour beer. So we've had the session sours, and this is what we call the serious sours. So the serious sours are what Vault City was known for before the session sours came along. The kind of 7%-ish, 300 grams per liter combinations of fruit and spices and flowers and herbs and that sort of thing. And internally, we'll get to in a bit, but the higher ABV beers we call silly sours, because if the idea isn't silly enough, then it doesn't go in that category. And what we ended up calling the beers in the middle, which we've been doing up until there, was normal sours. And we had the session, the normal, and the silly. And we're like, hang on, we're calling them normal, but they're 7.5%, 300 grams per liter. beers that taste like raspberry and violets. That doesn't quite fit. So we've ended up calling them serious sours. But yeah, this is a recipe that I'm really proud of because I came up with it. And the raspberry and violet character is beautiful in my opinion. The nose is just full of that violet petal. I don't know if in Australia you have the sweets called Parma violets. So they're little purple like tablets, and they're sweet. They're sweeties like for kids. But they're a big thing in the UK, Parma violets, and it smells just like that. It's slightly candied.
I'm not sure, but maybe they are available in Austria. Maybe someone can help us.
Yeah, maybe. If there's a
people,
violet flavored sweetie,
there are
the direction it goes in.
Some candies. There are some candies which are available at the pharmacy.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if this is that kind of candy, but it reminds me a little bit.
Yeah, could be. But that violet aroma from the violet petals is absolutely huge on the nose. That's definitely the dominant aroma. And then when you go to take a sip, that local Scottish raspberry, so these raspberries were picked maybe 20 miles north of here in Fife, and you get this explosion of tart raspberry with that little bit of sweetness coming through in the back. The candied violet petals come back up when you're again retronasally, and then you're left with this, mouth-watering, rich raspberry character. Again, the acidity and the sweetness being balanced nicely, that aromatic with that rich fullness of the mouthfeel. It's this is a special one for me. I'm sad I don't have one to drink.
It is indeed a really special beer, because it's so intense.
Yeah, it's
this is serious. Also taste-wise.
Yeah, it's cool. It's a really cool one. So we're really lucky being in Scotland. It's not often recognized as such, but we have, amazing berries and soft fruits being grown all around us. Predominantly raspberries, strawberries, cherries, and then a lot of hybrid fruits come out of Scotland as well. So we've brewed a beer with tayberry, which is a cross between a raspberry and a blackberry, and also honeyberry, which is the berry from a honeysuckle bush. So we've done some pretty cool stuff with local farmers, including last year we had what we called our Farm to Fermenter series. So the concept being the same as restaurants have from farm to plate, that they shorten the distance between produce and consumer. So we made the pledge to take fruit picked from the vine or from the tree or from wherever and have it in the fermenter within 24 hours. So we worked with our local farmers to time their harvest window and then timed in our brew schedule with that so that we would have our fermentation done and then be able to go and pick the berries from the farm and have them straight in the fermenter within one day. I think the quickest we managed was 8 hours.
Really?
It was really cool day and a great project, But unfortunately, we came to the idea in the middle of summer. So it was the middle of fruit growing season. We didn't want to do, 6 of them every week. We wanted to space them out a little bit. So we managed to do raspberry and then we did blueberry. And when we came around to doing the cherry, we actually missed the cherry window. So the cherry picking season is a few months, but they're different varieties of cherry. So fruits come into season usually for 2-week window. So that's why farmers plant different varieties of fruits so that they have a longer period to be able to sell their fruit for. And when we got around to cherry, it was right at the end of the window. And we wanted the tart cherries, but they fruit first. So we ended up with sweet cherries at the end, which wasn't quite what we wanted for the beer, but also we couldn't get it in that 24-hour window. It was too late. So we put the labels in the bin and we did an edition of one of our other beers with cherry because the cherry was still beautiful and it was only like 2 days out of the field, but it wasn't in that window that we wanted to promise by and we didn't want to lie about it. So we'll just change the beer to a different cherry beer and get on with it. What do you think? What do you think of the raspberry violet?
Yeah.
You like it?
Yes.
Okay.
I like it a lot, really. And I can, see this beer, with some goat cheese, a goat cheese salad, something like this, which.
Absolutely. I actually did a cheese and beer tasting a cheesemonger in Bristol, just a virtual tasting, and we had this beer, and I think we had it with a goat's cheese. I think it was a ash rolled goat's cheese, Thorston maybe. But yeah, it was beautiful, creamy, light, slightly acidic goat's cheese with that almost lemony acidity with the raspberry and the violet. It was incredible. So
going back to the story, when Johnny left, let's go inside.
Yeah, let's get into that.
Because it was a really young, well, it is still a young company, but they only worked together 1.5 years.
Yeah, for sure.
More or less. And then what happened that Johnny decides to left and build immediately up? What I read, is that he immediately came out with a new brewery in Dundee.
Yeah, so the timeline was a little stretched from the way it looks from the outside. Okay. So Johnny and Steve working together realized that they probably weren't that compatible as much as they were in the beginning. Okay. And I think they had what I would say, from a music scene, they had creative differences.
Okay.
Johnny was definitely more about the wild mix firm and using barrels and Brettanomyces. That was his love interest.
He was that kind of brewer, home brewer.
That was his kind of brewing to begin with. And his knowledge of mixed cultures, and he harvested all the yeast and brought all these different yeast and bacteria together to make our house mixed culture. And that's something that we'll always have Johnny in the brewery is this mixed culture. But he wanted to go down more of that direction. And Steve was very interested in this modern sour beer approach, which wasn't really to Johnny's taste. So he enjoyed making the beers and putting them out there, but he was more interested in going down that direction. And the fact that their working relationship was kind of strained, and then the coronavirus pandemic just heightened all of that. It made a stressful situation much more stressful. And so Johnny decided to leave and do his own thing. He wasn't really sure what he wanted to do at that point. He knew he wanted to go in this mixed firm area, but he actually worked with 71 Brewing for the summer until he kind of got his head around what he was going to do and brought some plans together and got his branding in, to which, me and Steve wished him all the best with and helped out as best we could. Whenever, he had questions about how to source this, that, we were always there to support. And then in October last year, he was ready to reveal what was happening. So at that point, we announced it. We actually kept it kind of on the down low until Johnny knew what he wanted to do. And also, I think it was a big thing for him to be able to say, I've left Vault City, but here's my new project, rather than I've left Vault City and I'm just kind of hanging out for a bit. But, I can understand that,
Makes sense. Makes sense.
So yeah, we held off on announcing it from Vault City's side until Johnny was ready to announce it from his side. So he's got his new mixed fermentation brewery called Holy Goat Brewing up in Dundee, which is really cool. His branding looks awesome. It's very heavy metal and very not Vault City.
That's true.
Which I really like. I really like that it's going right down his direction and the way that he wants to do it and stuff like that. So yeah. We all wish him all the best. Like to think that he wishes us the same.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure because it sounds that you're still in a good relationship.
Yeah, for sure. Like me and Johnny chat occasionally. And there was, as an employee and a bystander watching two co-founders, come apart.
Yeah,
it was remarkably amicable and friendly. I don't think they spoke to each other for maybe 6 months, which is also understandable. Yeah,
that's true, because they started then in one of the biggest crises in the last couple of years, in the last decades,
Big one. So, but yeah, they left with, if there was no coronavirus, there would have been hugs, and it was obviously sad that they decided to go different ways, but also I think it was the best thing for Johnny, and I'm really excited to drink his beers and see what I make.
Cool. But the good thing is, on the other hand, that you really helped Stephen out, because you came from this marketing side, but then you get all this knowledge out from Overworks, which was quite helpful, I guess, for Stephen at this point, because Johnny was this kind of mixed fermentation and funky kind of brewing beer styles, and then he was lucky enough that you joined the company, you know.
Yeah, it was really interesting coming from my background because Steve and Johnny were both homebrewers. So practices that they did in the brewery are basically just homebrew on a big scale. So some things, you know, really didn't make sense. Like when they were cleaning tanks, they were using 400 liters of caustic for a 4,000 liter fermenter, when the actual number is 40. All of a sudden, we're saving a lot of money on chemicals. But other things that they've brought in from homebrewing are actually quite eye-opening for me. And I'm like, wow, I never would have done that at all with my kind of brewing experience. Not that I'm a brewer, but from being never
a lot, you know.
But because they're coming at it from a homebrewer's perspective and not from the brewing industry, they don't have any of that, or certainly Steve doesn't have any of that kind of dogma and doing something the way that you know it to be done. He's got a very fresh perspective on a lot of things, both with brewing and production, but also with the business itself. And I think that for me has been one of the most kind of eye-opening and refreshing things, is going from a couple of breweries that are very established breweries into something that's very young, but with no real brewing experience. To look at it in a whole new light and do things in a whole new way, which has been remarkable, to be honest. It's really cool.
And it turns out phenomenal, you know.
Yeah, and it turns out
it's a good thing, you know. Yeah, really. Cool. So let's go for the next beer.
Yeah, let's get stuck into the next serious sour, which I've actually got now, so that's good.
Yeah, that's good. Change it back from water to beer.
Yeah, that's always a good moment.
Yeah.
This is not to blow my own fiddle, but this is another one of the recipes that I came up with and I'm very proud of.
Okay. Then.
So the blackcurrant lemon verbena. I mean, the color is just amazing.
That's true.
So I don't know if you've had much lemon verbena in your time.
No, not really.
But it's one of my favorite herbs. It's a really, really cool herb. It's a little like lemon balm, which is a bit more common. And then the way that I describe it to people who've never heard of it before is kind of like lemongrass, but without the spicy element to it. So forget about all the Thai spices, just that lemongrass, herbaceous lemon character. That's what I get in the nose. And it comes across very sherbety. So the sherbet aspect of our mixed culture and our mixed culture's acidity, that sherbetiness really lends in beautifully to that sherbety lemon verbena note. And the blackcurrants are a berry that are quite tannic, quite sharp, but they also take herbs really well. Some of my favorite sour beers before working here have been red fruits, red berries, and different herbs. So blackcurrant and basil, or blackberry and sage have been some of my favorite combinations. So doing blackcurrant and lemon verbena is something that I've always wanted to do. Okay. It came across, to me anyway, it came across beautifully. So this one's markedly drier than the other beers, I think it's fair to say. And that's not so much our fermentation. Our fermentation is pretty stable, but the tannins from the blackcurrants. Yeah, the blackcurrants are always going to give you a bit more sharpness, a little bit of malic acidity as well, as opposed to the lactic that our house mix culture produces. So rather than that lemony lactic, you've got that almost mouth-watering and almost full acidity of the malic, which is more like fruit acidity. And I think it's...
How many kilograms you're adding that it get this intense acidity out from the fruit?
This will be another 800 kilos in the batch. So it'll be 800 kilos of black currants. And then I think we did maybe 50 kilos of lemon verbena. It might be 25, might be 50. I can't quite remember. But the balance is what we were striving for there. We wanted that herbaceous lemon verbena note to be present, but not dominant. So the black currants are a great base for that herb because black currants are so strong that actually we put quite a lot of lemon verbena in for the size of batch. But because those black currants are so big, you actually need quite a lot to stand up to that matching intensities again.
So Manfred is asking now if you guys are also using kind of Brettanomyces or what kind of yeast you're using.
So we don't use Brettanomyces at all. And the main reason for that is that Brettanomyces can get very funky. And a lot of Brett beers do have that element of funk, especially once they've been aged in bottle for a little while. And that's not the flavor we want to go for. That's what we associate with being quite nerdy. And personally, we all love those beers. But Vault City Brewing is more about fun and bold flavors and approachable flavors as well. So something that you can get nerdy about, but also you can walk in off the street and have a sip and be like, wow, that's a tasty pear beer or blackberry. So the Brettanomyces is definitely edging towards that dry, funky note. And also the dryness, which I just mentioned. Brett's a super attenuator, so it'll dry the beer almost all the way to zero. So it'll be very, very dry. And that can be unpalatable for a lot of people. We actually leave, by the process of our mixed culture fermentation, we leave a bit of malt sugars behind. So the final gravity of our beers is quite high, but that leaves you with the body. And it also leaves you with the sweetness to balance the acidity. So the yeast strain's been selected down that curve so that we have a fuller beer, a fuller body from the malt sugars, not from lactose. So we don't put lactose in our beer at all. So we have this richness from the malt, which lends into that balancing of the acidity, which is all down to our mixed culture. But the strains are actually unknown. So Johnny really did make some mixed culture magic and mixed up a bunch of yeast and bacteria, which we're not 100% sure what all is in there. And we've been re-pitching the yeast since I started, at least. In fact, no, since I started. So we did bank the yeast, the mixed culture, and we would buy a pitch of the yeast and a pitch of the bacteria, and then co-pitch the two together in the fermenter. But then one of the things I was mentioning, coming from a kind of brewing background, I was like, we should be using this yeast over and over and over again. That has difficulties, especially with mixed culture, because they like to drift. So the yeast and the bacteria are always trying to outcompete each other. So you end up with some batches that don't sour very well, and then other batches that sour way too fast and actually kill off the yeast. And it can be a really kind of delicate balancing act, which has led to throwing away some beers. It's one thing that I will say, particularly about Steve and Vault City, is that we're very unromantic about bad beer. So if a beer is going downhill, we pour it straight down the drain and we brew another batch and we get on with it. So we probably throw away between 10 and 15% of the beer that we produce. And that's just part of mixed culture fermentation. You know, sometimes it just goes wrong. However, luckily with mixed culture fermentation, it's usually very obvious from the very start. So we have our primary fermentation and we taste the beer and go, yeah, no, that's, you know, gone crazy sour, which we're not into. Or it's gone really phenolic and really spicy. And that's no good because that's going to clash with the fruit, or it dries out too much or whatever's gone wrong. But we just pour that beer straight down the drain and start again and kind of make sure that we revamp our mixed culture and we get it nice and healthy and happy and then pitch it in at the right rates and off we go. So, yeah, sorry, I've forgotten what the question was again. I was just rambling away about pouring beer in the drain.
What kind of yeast, but you gave a proper answer, you know, if you're using bread and all that kind of stuff, but it was a proper answer already, you know.
That's good.
No.
Yeah, I like to ramble in tangent, so I apologize. You'll have to keep
No. It's really interesting to listen, you know. It's really, really cool. Teresa is asking if you have a tap room.
So quickly on the yeast, because I didn't actually answer what yeast we use. We use a combination of landrace yeasts, which is the broader definition of Kveik. So Kveik is localized to Norway and Scandinavia. But landrace is the name that's given to that style of farmhouse yeast, but for all of the Baltics as well. So Kveik is a landrace yeast, but landrace yeast isn't necessarily Kveik, if that makes sense. So it's somewhere kind of Lithuania, Lithuanian farmhouse Kveik-esque strains of yeast, including some Kveik as well, I believe, and then different strains of lactobacillus. Mm-hmm. So it's essentially Kveik and lacto. Then taproom. We do not have a taproom at the moment, but we are in the process of building one. Not in the process of building one, in the process of planning to build one, I should say. We're not quite at the building stage yet. So we will have an awesome taproom, but that's kind of future plans, which I think with the story progressing, I'll talk more about in just a few minutes.
Okay. And tours? You're offering tours or not?
I could actually, at the end of the call, probably give you a quick tour of the brewery. I think the Wi-Fi will stretch far enough, so that'll be a little bit. But our brewery is very compact. So we have a big open room with lots of racking in it, and then our brew kit and fermenters at the end. So our tour would be standing in one spot and just turning on the circle.
Because Teresa was asking when she's allowed again to probably, or the plan is to visit you guys, but...
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, definitely come visit. Our tap room is going to be really cool. So definitely come and hang out at the tap room. You'll be able to see the whole brewery from your seat.
Okay. That's good. Perfect. So, blackcurrant, food recommendation?
Ooh, this is a tough one.
It's really tough. Because I'm thinking now, what can go and match?
For me, blackcurrant especially, and the blackcurrant and lemon verbena I think lends really well. I would be leaning towards a kind of game meat route. So definitely going down the meaty, but I would go with the venison. Some of my favorite venison dishes have had blackcurrant coulis or bramble coulis or something like that. So going with that really tannic, rich fruit element with a bit of acidity with the gamey red meat, I think would be an absolute winner. However, that's not really a dish. That's more just a meat. So that might be a bit of a cop-out. But I can see it working well with pheasant, with quail, with even pigeon, I think. So definitely something gamey that's got that intensity and that richness. Other than that, I can actually see this going really, really well with a strong blue cheese, like a creamy blue cheese, like a Stichelton. I think that funky blue vein note would pair in really nicely with the verbena, and the blackcurrant would be able to stand up to that creaminess really well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the cheese I can see as well.
That'd be my go-to.
Mm-hmm.
What do you?
Yuri is asking when it comes to sour beer, bottles or cans. By the way, people really love the big bottles. These all 0.375 liters. They're all right, and they're really
Yeah, there's
feel is perfect, for this kind of beers. And now the question is coming: cans are also a good option for sour beers.
So I don't think cans are a great option for sour beers. That's mostly down to practicality. For me, a can kind of cheapens it a little bit as well. So the 375ml bottles, they're big bottles, they're heavy, hefty. They feel like you've really purchased something. Like this is mine, And also with popping a cap.
This is my bottle.
My beer.
Yeah, my beer.
With opening a bottle, I always find that you have to pour it out, and there's almost a bit of ritual with opening a cap and probably sharing it with friends. I mean, I drink these by myself in the bath, but that's by the by. There's a little something about it, something special. Whereas a can of beer, it may be the Brit in me, but I just drink it straight out of the can. And I know that's terrible, and I realize that. However, that's the compulsion, right? It's not necessarily what I do. If I have an expensive beer in a can, I'll pour it in a glass and enjoy it the way that I should enjoy it. But I still want to take the first sip out of the can.
Yeah, I agree. When it gets especially to this more intense beers, and not these session sours, then it really represents the beer in a perfect way, because you can really show the bottle, you can play around, you can pour it nicely, you can open it, you can
Yeah, and it sets
celebrate it. You can.
Well, there's one of my favorite things from my wild beer days was the slogan of "Drink wildly different," and the way we'd kind of emphasize this at events was to pour the Ninkasi beer in champagne flutes. So when you drink a beer out of a champagne flute, you instantly approach it differently.
It must be something really
there's something here, and I'm going to think about it more like a champagne than I am like a beer. Whereas if I were to pour you, the Pear Drop's probably maybe not a great one, but say the Pear Drop Session Sour, it's tart and it's fruity. But if I were to pour it in a pint glass, it would look like a pale ale because it's a pale, a little hazy, it's got chocolate on it. And if you pick up a pint glass and have a swig, because what you do with a pint glass is swig it, you're going to have your mouth full of sour beer and you're probably going to choke or spit it out.
Immediately, in the bar in front of your face.
Yeah. So that idea of approaching stuff slightly different, I think you had it when you kind of said presenting the bottle. It just makes you think and appreciate it in a different way, which is perfect, And
I'm expecting something special,
Yes, definitely. It sets the mood. It's like lighting some candles. But the more practical side is that cans can't hold pressure. So I'm sure you've all heard horror stories of cans exploding in people's cupboards because of re-fermentation and, stuff happens sometimes and that's just the way of it. But with the champagne bottles, because these are half bottle champagne bottles, they can hold something crazy like 9 bar of pressure, which is, I don't even know how many PSI, but a lot. And if there is any re-fermentation with our beers, which there shouldn't be, because we wait until our beers are stable before we pack them.
Okay.
If there were to be any re-fermentation, if we did manage to get a Brett infection, for example, which would be disastrous, the bottles are not going to explode. All that would happen is that you would open it and it would maybe fizz over. And if it got to the point where it was fizzing over, we'd recall it. But you could probably safely put it in your fridge, get it cold, and then crack it, and it's going to be fine. Just like a bottle of champagne.
Yeah.
However, if you have a can, the seam's actually going to unroll at about 1 bar, and then it's going to pop. Or sorry, I say 1 bar, 2 bar. 1 bar of extra pressure. Which is a real problem. And also the live yeast in our beers. So we have our mixed culture does go into the bottles as well. So if you ever want to clone a Vault City beer, just leave a little bit of sediment in the bottom, chuck it in your homebrew. It's all in there. But the mixed culture is live and it is still fermenting away, not in a re-fermentation sense, but it does evolve over time because it wants to kind of keep going, keep doing stuff and keep changing things. That's why we suggest that you drink these beers fresh rather than aged. They will last for a long time, maybe indefinitely in bottle if they're kept in the right conditions, but they will change gradually over time. And what we found with our fruit beers is the fruit tends to diminish and we end up with a little bit more yeast character, which is not a bad thing, but it's not the way that we intended them to be. We want them to be big, juicy fruit bombs, So we definitely advise drinking them fresher rather than sitting on them for 10 years like a lambic bottle.
It's a fair point, especially when it comes to these fruits, these fruit characters, you should drink them fresh.
Yeah, definitely.
You can keep one, and see how it's changing,
Yeah, absolutely. By all means, tuck one away and taste it in a year's time, see how it's going. But there'll definitely be a slightly different beer and not quite so juicy, I don't think. The last point with the can and bottle as well is the cap. So the great thing about cans is that they're completely airtight, right? And they don't let any oxygen in, whereas caps can let a little bit of ingress. That's actually good for mixed cultures because they scavenge oxygen. So a little bit of air going in actually keeps that yeast going. So it's not like it's going to stale overnight or anything. It's going to be tiny amounts of oxygen transport over a long period of time. But that can actually help to keep it a little bit fresher. So the can with sour beer, everything's just going to starve of oxygen and give up. So you're not going to have that lovely long-term aging effect. With more traditional sour beers, should I say, you'll have that beautiful evolution in bottle of yeast character coming out and more funkiness and whatever else. Whereas you wouldn't get that as well in a can. It would be more stressed in a can.
Okay. Cool. Last question, packaging is natural cork and cage. Is this something you are planning or are you already did, or?
No, we've never done it before. We have done corks. So at festivals before I joined Vault City, we did a couple of beers called 99 grams per liter. We did 99 grams per liter of fruit, which is the legal maximum you could put in a beer before not being able to call it beer. And so I can say now for the officials that there was definitely only 999 grams per liter in those beers. We didn't go over that mark at all.
Okay.
But they were pretty stupid. And we did them in like huge, crazy bottles. It's actually on our Instagram. If you scroll right down to the bottom, they have these like beautiful bulbs and then they're really long necks.
I saw it on Facebook today.
Yeah, so they're 1.5 liter bottles. And they were packed with this beautiful beer. And the big pour, they had tiny corks in the top, but they weren't exactly cork and cage.
Okay.
Cage is something that we will, I think, probably bring in, but not for these beers. So we are planning a more traditional mixed firm side of Vault City, which we haven't ventured into yet, which will be right across the road where I'm looking at. Again, future plans I'll talk about in a bit. But I think we'll probably go cork and cage for those guys.
Cool. So there are many plans already.
Oh, we got plans.
In the pipeline.
We got lots of pipeline plans.
So.
Are we on to the Rhubarb Maple Pecan? So the Rhubarb Maple Pecan is a really cool beer. This is the kind of beer that I would have, laughed Vault City out the door when I worked at Overworks for, and been really disdainful of because of my, traditional sour education, as it were. But this for me is an absolutely magical beer. Around about autumn time, near Halloween, we did 2 autumn beers in 2020. So we did a blueberry pumpkin spice latte, which was, and we did an apple maple pecan. And the apple maple pecan was one of our highest rated and one of our internally favorite beers from last year. It had the, fresh apple bite. It had this rich maple sweetness, and I had this lovely earthy pecan. It was like an American pie all in one go. And we wanted to bring it back again, but didn't want to do it out of autumn. So we were like, okay, we'll go for springtime. What's a much more spring fruit? And went with rhubarb maple pecan in that same kind of pie. And you have this beautiful tart, fresh rhubarb. You have this sweet, almost kind of decadent maple syrup character. And then you have this nuttiness, this earthy nuttiness right on the finish. It's this beautiful wave of flavor. And it all is in a sour beer, It sounds absolutely bananas. And if you told me...
Sounds absolutely bananas, yeah.
But it's great. That's the magic.
It is magic, because it's kind of a completely different taste. Rhubarb.
When I drink these beers, I always think of my kind of first exploration into craft beer and being really blown away by the variety of flavors, And it's been a long time since I've been wowed by a beer. And I tried the Vault City beers and I was wowed. I was really shocked at the flavor combinations and the expression of flavor as well. And this is one of these beers that keeps getting me. Every time I try it, I'm like, holy crap, this can't be in a sour beer. This is crazy. There's actually a lot more of the pecan and the maple on the nose than I remember there being.
Yeah.
That maple pecan is really sweet, rich, a little bit smoky almost from the pecan. And then the really bright, tart rhubarb.
This combination, I don't know if I ever had this combination, rhubarb in a beer. I'm thinking now, when I ever had a rhubarb beer.
You might have had an Overworks rhubarb beer, actually. We did rhubarb and strawberry. It was one of the very first beers we did out of Overworks. It was called Hador, I believe. It was when we had crazy Latin names for all of our beers.
Hador? No, never had.
Very early on.
No.
Possibly not. But yeah, it's dessert in a glass,
It's really dessert in a glass. Food-wise, what do you recommend?
Oh God. Maple, pecan, and rhubarb. I mean, a pie.
Leave it alone, and drink it as a dessert,
Exactly. Drink it as a dessert as it is. I mean, with the amount of maple, I can see kind of bacon coming into it a little bit, maybe pancakes, having it with pancakes. The pancakes are more breakfast vibes, so maybe not. But I mean, I want to put it on a pancake.
Yeah, there's a biggest thing. It reminds me a little bit on shisha smoking, when you get in a shisha bar and get something like a shisha. Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of get that.
Yeah. It's
that's a good one.
I think of course. Yeah.
The most specific and unusual flavor note I've ever had.
Yeah.
Shisha smoke.
No, it's great.
Yeah.
And it's kind of magical, to bring all this flavor together in a sour beer. It's
yeah, it's a little bit mind-bending. And the maple syrup is definitely very prominent. And for me, the pecans are really big too, but they don't overpower each other. And you still have that fresh rhubarb on the palate as well.
Yes, on the palate is, in the nose it gets this pecan, maple kind of aroma, but then when you drink it, it's a mixed combination, but still, also the aftertaste is still the rhubarb.
Yeah, that rhubarb comes through really strong.
It's
It's great. It's one of the things that I really like about our beers, and I have no science to back this up at all, but all of the flavor elements seem to stay very separate. So we managed to have, a rhubarb maple pecan beer not just taste like a hot mess. It tastes like rhubarb, it tastes like maple, and it tastes like pecan, which, I absolutely love about them. And it's one of the things that Steve asked me when I first came on board was, or kind of left in my corner. It was like, if you want to come up with some kind of naming convention or want to come up with quirky names for the beers, then go ahead. And I was like, no, it's perfect. You say exactly what it is and you deliver exactly
it delivers, it holds what it says on the label, Every single beer so far, it's written and it is there.
And it will be so, yeah. And I think we've got a lot of trust from a lot of our fans in the UK for when we say that something is going to taste like the next one, guava, kiwi, melon, and mango. It sounds like a stupid thing to say, but they know that it's Vault City and they know that it's going to taste like guava, kiwi, melon, and mango.
No, it's super cool. So tell us a little bit about the plans in the pipeline.
Okay, so I'll quickly finish up the story because we got to Johnny leaving and Holy Goat and stuff like that. And I think I mentioned that me and Steve ran with our feet throwing out downhill for all of summer last year.
And you get help from North 6 Degree?
Yeah, from 6 Degrees Bar. And then we started building the team. So we had the same kind of situation that we did with the web shop, where it all started falling down around our ears and it all started kind of going a bit wrong. And that was because we were putting out too much beer. So we had these 4 fermenters, and our mix culture is quite quick, especially for sour beer. So our beer from brew day to package day is about 2 weeks. So we have about a 2-week turnaround on the beers, and we were brewing the beer, 4 beers essentially every 2 weeks. So we were bringing out at our hardest running pace that we were going, just myself and Steve. We put out 8 beers in June, 8 in July, and then 9 in August. So we released a huge amount of our beer, and it got to the point where we were putting too much out and people weren't that interested in picking it up because it was just too much to keep up with, I don't know if you remember the Cloudwater Dippa series, where V13 was on the shelves, but V6 was still in keg and nobody would touch it. So it was that kind of element that we had too many beers going out into the market and needed to rein it in a little bit. And we were also killing ourselves to try and do it. I don't think Steve will mind me saying that neither of us are the most organized people in the world. which doesn't help when you're running at full tilt. So we brought on a guy called Andy Wilkie. So another Andy, who is possibly the most organized person I've ever met in my life. So he was exactly the right person to come on as operations manager and make sure that things arrived on time, that things left on time, and that the schedule was on track. We actually took on one of the part-time army guys, part-time bar guys. So Haig from Dynamo came on board full-time, and he actually moved with us. And our last addition was Ravi, who I used to work with at Overworks. So as we were kind of stumbling over ourselves, we brought it back to 3 releases every 2 weeks, which is what we do in the UK. We have 1 beer from each of our series. I should say as well, the Rhubarb Maple Pecan fits into our silly sour category. So that's right up there. It's silly. And if an idea doesn't get a laugh or a kind of a huh out of us around the table, then it's not weird enough to go in the silly sour. So this one definitely fits in that category. So we release 1 from each series. We do a session, a serious, and a silly every 2 weeks. And that seems to be perfect for us, that we can roll that on very comfortably. And it's not too much beer going out at once, but it's also enough variety that people want to try a little bit of this and that. And it's been working really well for us since about September last year. So that's been really good. So yeah, the reason that we were running so fast and we were putting out so much beer is we were trying to get to the point where we could move back to Edinburgh from Dundee. Because at this point we were still up in 71 Brewing in Dundee. And we always wanted to move back to Edinburgh and have our own space. And it looked like summer was coming up, which is where I'm sitting right now. So spoiler alert, it worked. But we took on the warehouse in Edinburgh, in Portobello, which is kind of like a seaside town in Edinburgh. So Edinburgh is sort of swallowed seaside town, as it were. But down in Portobello, we're maybe a 7-minute walk to the beach. So we're right by the beach. It's a sandy beach, if you can imagine it, in Scotland. Very cool area with lots of like independent bars, coffee shops, lots of cool places to get takeaway food. So one of the draws was the idea of having a tap room so close to Portobello, which is a very cool area. And also is the right kind of size for us as well. It's a big space. The room I'm in just now, which you can see, is about the same size. This is our office, and it's about the same size of our entire production area at 71 Brewing. So it's very, very small, very cramped. My office was just a fold-out table over an open drain with the glycol lines running past my knees. So it was always like 5 degrees Celsius by my chair. So yeah, now we're here. I'll take you through in a little bit to see the back. But we had our brew kit arrive just before Christmas, and we had it commissioned between Christmas and New Year. So we're brewing our first batches between Christmas and New Year. And we had our brewer, our first actual brewer in the brewery arrive, who was Ravi from Overworks. So he was the cellarman at Overworks and worked at Oedipus in Amsterdam before that. He came from Oedipus to Overworks, and then he came from Overworks down to Voltsee. And he organizes the Carnaval Britannomyces every year in Amsterdam. So he's a crazy sour beer head, and yeah, one of the yeastiest people I know in the best way. So he was the perfect person to come on and just take our mixed culture and understand it and nurse it and produce the beers that we're making. So we commissioned the kit between Christmas and New Year, and then we had our first beers going out, our 3 beers from our 3 series on the 14th of January. So we hit our 2-week window with our first beers out the bat, and we've been releasing 3 beers every 2 weeks since then, which has just been crazy. So we do have one more member of staff, a guy called Joe, who's a kind of local bartender hero. He's really well known in Edinburgh for being in about breweries and bars. And he's come on as kind of initially as a local delivery driver, and then came on full time. So we were doing, when the lockdown, I don't know, number 5 happened in the UK, we weren't able to have people come and collect beer, because that's one of the big things with being in Portobello, is we want to be part of the community. That's a big thing for us, is being part of the Portobello community and hosting events and being able to help other businesses out and stuff like that. So we opened up the doors to collect, so you could come and collect the beer from the brewery. But that got removed in the latest restrictions. So we're like, right, we'll start delivering to people instead. And that was going really well. So we had Joe come in to help us out with that because he was still not working because of the pandemic. And he was so cool and so good that we've taken him on as a sales and marketing kind of executive, I guess you'd call it, but sales and marketing guy. And he's been absolutely brilliant. But the problem is that he's too busy now to do the local delivery. So we've had to bin off the local delivery again, which is a shame. So we'll get right. So yeah, that's us all the way up to date to today. I don't know about you, but I definitely need that last beer. So let's get that guava, kiwi, melon, mango.
We're really waiting for it, but there's a question coming. Manfred is asking, you're planning to make a sour beer with quince? Or maybe you had already one?
I was involved in making a sour beer with quince at Overworks. That was
I know. That's I remember.
And I would not make one again if I have the option to.
Okay. That's a fair answer. And Manfred is also asking if all the beers are top fermented.
Yes, the Kveik, kind of Kveik landrace yeast is a warm fermenting ale yeast, so it's all top fermented. It doesn't make too much krausen, so it doesn't actually foam up that much in the fermenter. But yeah, they are top fermenting yeast.
So now we're coming, if I get the right information when it comes to Untapped, which is really important for you, I think, because you are now rated as Scotland's top brewery.
Yeah.
Mango, guava, kichi, lemon beer is your highest rated?
Yes. Yeah, so this one is our highest rated beer on Untapped. It's a really good point, actually. Untapped is a big thing for us. Which breweries I've worked in before, it's been not a big thing because they weren't very high up on the leaderboard for it.
Yeah.
Funny how that works.
Especially BrewDog,
yeah. Well, that too. But it's a really interesting app that it's very fickle. Anyone can rate your beers, which I'm not a huge fan of, but also think it's very fair. But I've had, when I was at Wild Beer, one of my favorite comments I ever saw about any beer was for the Millionaire Stout. I'm sure you know it, the salted caramel stout.
Salty caramel stout. Yeah.
Yes, so like sweet, delicious, rich, chocolatey, amazing stout. And the comment gave it 1 star and said that it was too bitter for a saison. I don't know if you're just taking the piss or if you just don't know or like what's going on here. So it's really interesting, and people score very differently. So if you look at breweries in the States, they're like 4.5 out of 5 is like really good to 4.6 is like top of the leaderboard. Whereas in the UK, if you're above 3.6, you're doing really well. Like I don't know what it is about the UK drinking culture, but nobody gets 5 stars. The comment will be like, "This is the perfect Helles lager." 3 stars. It's like, why? If it's perfect.
Why? If it's perfect, then give 5. Yeah, or at least 4.5. It
blows my mind. But also, that's a personal opinion thing too, for sure. So we had someone that we noticed rated all of our beers as 2.5 or 3. I'm like, man, what's going on here? They've like rated a load of our beers. We know them as well. So we kind of reached out and said, what's going on? Are you not enjoying them? Like, no, I think they're great. I was like, okay, so if you think they're great, how come they're getting 2.5 stars out of 5? It's like, oh, well, I just, that's the way that I look at it, that a 5-star has to be changing my life. And if I'm enjoying them and think they're really good, I'll give them 2.5 because that's like, the bench line that I expect. And I go up or down. So I totally get it. People are more than free to vote however they want with their stars, etc. However, people have seemed to vote our beers really highly, which is great. I mean, we really enjoy them, which is brilliant. And yes, this is our top-rated beer on Untapped, which actually knocked off a beer I thought we would never beat. So the previous top was our marshmallow smoothie sour with raspberry, blueberry, and blackcurrant and marshmallow, obviously. Which was just bananas, and people went nuts for it and fucking loved it and rated it to almost 4.5 stars, which I was really blown away by. And then this one came along and beat it out of the water, which is really cool.
So then let's crack the bottle.
Let's crack it. So yeah, you're talking about breakfast juice earlier.
So I got the new breakfast juice.
This is the new breakfast juice. Here we go. So cheers.
Cheers.
Oh. Yeah, this is an exciting beer. I also came up with the flavor combination for this one, so I'm very proud of this one being the top rated score. But I think the guava is just such an interesting, full, rich flavor. The aroma for me straight away is guava, which if you're not really used to guava as a fruit, it's got an almost minty note to it, like menthol note to it. So there's a little bit of like green there, and that's the guava really coming through. But the kiwi's fighting for it as well. That kiwi sharpness. And the acidity for me is all kiwi. But then you get this rich kind of base of mango and sweet melon on the finish as well. It's like this big wave of flavor where all the different fruits have their peaks and come through.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think? You've gone very quiet.
Yeah, because it's kind of, that's kind of a game changer. I'm curious what this guy in the UK is rating for this beer, because that can be something, he easily can give 5 because this changed his life, because that's...
Yeah, it's a lot of flavor.
It's an explosion. It's a really flavor bomb, in the mouth. It's so intense. It's so complex,
Yeah. There's a lot going on with those flavors, but also in balance, there's it's not super sweet. It's not, or it is sweet for sure, because it's all those tropical elements, but it's not sticky because you still have that acidity to balance it.
To balance it out.
But it's also not the acidity of, years and years in barrels where it's really super sour and going to, turn your face inside out. But it's the level of acidity you expect from biting a kiwi. And so that really amplifies that kiwi character.
Mm-hmm.
It's a biggie. And definitely Philly.
It's Philly, it's biggie, and I think the only thing you can combine it food-wise is a tropical fruit salad.
Yeah.
That's the only thing, you can...
You may as well put it in the glass as well. Just eat it.
Yeah. Put in some fruits and that's it,
Yeah, I was having a little panic there about food pairings, but I'm not sure there's much on that intensity level, there's not much this is intense.
Really, add some fruits, drink it cold, fresh, you can create a long drink or a kind of a cocktail.
Yeah.
That's it.
Done.
Teresa is asking, we forgot to talk a little bit about the logo and the name of the brewery.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I always forget to talk about this.
Okay.
So excuse me. So the name Vault City is actually really cool. It's got a little bit more nerdy history to it than our beers do. But the Edinburgh city is built on 7 hills. So there's actually a very hilly city, but lots of it's been leveled out just by construction. So it's not very hilly to walk around, but you can kind of see bits of it. And there's only 2 that are still visible. So the other 5 hills have disappeared under the city, as it were. And one of the big moments in the kind of late 1700s, I think it was like 1788 or along those lines, they built a bridge across one of the valleys between 2 of the hills. And the bridge had 19 arches. So the arches were called the vaults. And the vaults were home to loads of different artisans. So the vaults were specifically built out and let out to craftsmen. So there was cobblers, there was coopers, bakers, dressmakers, watchmakers, all of these artisanal tradesmen and women, I should say, all working in these vaults, as they're called. So they're called the city vaults. They then kind of went into disrepair and disrepute. and a lot of homeless people started living there, and we're actually living there up until pretty recently. And you can still go in, and you can go all the way through these tunnels and mazes and find these rooms and areas where like there's obviously been people sleeping there hundreds of years ago, and like kids' toys and stuff down there as well. It's crazy, kind of creepy and interesting. But basically all the businesses moved up to the bridge. So initially all the tradesmen were underneath it, but then they started building on top of the bridge. And that's where you can still go and get coffee and lunch and stuff like that. So if you know the BrewDog bar in Cowgate, so that big bridge that goes over the top of it, that's part of it, part of that bridge where all the vaults would have been. So the idea being that the Edinburgh...
I've been there.
Sorry?
I've been there in Edinburgh.
Yeah, you would have walked underneath it if you're going to BrewDog. So the Vault City is reference to the Edinburgh City Vaults, which is kind of tied into this history of the city and our kind of sense of place in Edinburgh. So we quite often talk about Vault City being modern sour beer brewed in the heart of Scotland. That's our kind of like catchline, as it were. And the heart of Scotland being reference to the fact that we're in Edinburgh, and that this is our hometown and we're here to stay, sort of thing. And yeah, the logo is exactly that. It's the arch with the portcullis for the gates, for that kind of city vibe, but also the vaults and the arches from the bridge. Yeah.
Cool. So I would say now, before we say, okay, last round for questions, maybe you can give us a short tour. Because it's not a really big property, so it shouldn't be a long tour.
Luckily, we did a big tidy up today as well, so that's good. So yeah, this is our little office where it would have fit our entire production area, including our arcade machine, which is pretty cool. It's still broken.
Is there still, I want to ask, is there still time to play? If it's broken, it's not possible to play. Okay.
And then we come out into our brewery space. We have lots of racking and beers ready to go. And then we have our brewery down the bottom. So I'll get as far as I can, but I'm a little worried that I'm going to drop off the call. So I'm going to keep an eye.
Cool.
Yeah, we're still good. We're still good. So we have our UK over this side.
Mm-hmm.
So we have there's our hot liquor ton. And then it'll go to our kettle and our mash tuns on the other side with a little platform. And this is our bottling line, which saved our bacon last year. That's the bottling line that saved us.
Yeah.
And then further through, my signal looks pretty good actually, so we're doing fine. We have our... Hey, look at this. We're all the way in production. We're fine. So yeah, we have our tanks down here as well.
Cool.
In Vault City. So we've got our couple of tanks. We've added a few more now. We're now up to 7 tanks. And we have our brew kit up the top. So
one batch is how big? 30 hectoliters?
It's about 50 actually. It's supposed
15.
to... 50.
50.
Yeah, 50 hex. So it's a 50 hec kit. We usually get around 35 hectoliters out of it for the brew. And then we add fruit back in, obviously loads of fruit. So we usually end up with around 4,000 hectoliters of beer to be packaged. And then we have usually quite a lot of loss on that as well. So we normally count on having about 40 hectoliters per batch. But we can go all the way down to kind of 32 and sometimes we're up at 42, something like that.
Okay. And how big was the production last year, by the end of the year, in total?
Oh, I did the math the other day, but I can't remember for the whole year. 120 hectoliters, something like that?
No. Production last year, how many hectoliters were produced last year at Fall City? 120 hectoliters is not possible.
Yeah.
No, 1,200 hectoliters?
Oh, yes. 1,200 hectoliters.
Yeah, because 120 is way too less, No.
Yeah, sorry, my bad. Yeah, sorry.
1,200. No. Yeah.
Something like that. So looking like we're going to be up towards 500,000 this year. So we're going to be pushing towards that UK duty threshold limit, which is then whether we go real big or kind of keep it fairly small and keep doing what we're doing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it was a super interesting tasting, and it's
good.
The beers are mind-blowing, they are completely different. I'm really happy that you reached out, that we find together that we know each other and that we got the possibility to bring these beers to Austria, because I think it can be a really game changer. And I hope that all the people which bought the beers already are also mind-blown and surprised like me,
Yeah. That's
the last one, they are all to the point, and the most important thing is that really, I like that kind of things also, that when something is written on the label, it is there.
Yeah.
Because you don't have to hit something, hide something. It is clear, that's
there's
Rhubarb, marble, Pecan, that's blackcurrant, lemon verbena. No, it's absolutely delicious.
That's it. No, I'm really glad you've enjoyed it. That's a big part of what I try and do of the marketing of Vault City, is make sure that we're very kind of clear and open and honest. So we talked a little bit before we jumped on the tasting about Tesco. So Tesco in the UK is the biggest supermarket, and we have a couple of beers going in there. And that was a big thing for us. It was a big gamble, because craft beer drinkers generally don't like beers that go into supermarkets, because they can show a kind of loss of quality, or you can start cutting corners and that sort of thing, which isn't where we're going at all. They're Vault City beers. They're just more a sessionable, easy, approachable route. So we have a raspberry sour and a tropical sour. And we did a blog post on our website, which we
today.
Yeah, so we're very open.
Good reading.
Yeah, it was great coming from Steve. Just like, here's why we're doing it, because we do all this cool stuff and we want to keep doing it. And we've now got a really big customer where we can get lots of beer to lots of people, and it's still our beer. There's no real change there, And one of the main things that people push back on was that they're in the smaller bottles. They're kind of similar to the session sours, and they're now less expensive. But we took some of the profit that we can make from the big customer and actually reduced our price to the point where it wouldn't really make sense without that big customer, to try and help the independent bottle shops to keep that going, and to keep that competitiveness. So yeah, that honesty is definitely something that rings true throughout everything we try and do.
Perfect. So there are no more questions. Then I would say thank you for these 2 hours. They were flying, it was super nice to see you again, nice to chat with you again. I hope that all the people enjoyed the beers like I did. So it was super, super nice, and hopefully be able soon to visit you guys in Portugal.
Yeah, please do. That'd be great.
Ja. So, danke fürs Zuschauen. Es war ein toller Abend. Mir hat es irrsinnig viel Spaß gemacht. Ich hoffe, euch zu Hause genauso. Und ganz kurz noch, die nächsten Verkostungen sind mittlerweile online. 4.5. Theresiana und 13.5. ist Samuel Smith, wieder aus England, jetzt eher wieder mehr hin zu traditionellen Brauereien. Aber nach diesem Ausflug dieser Woche und letzter Woche war es wirklich, wirklich sehr interessant. Und ich sage danke fürs Zuschauen und bis zum nächsten Mal.